The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. At 215 kilometers per hour, Hurricane Melissa tore through Jamaica like a monster unleashed from the depths of the Caribbean Sea, transforming one of the world's most beautiful islands into a landscape of unimaginable destruction. This wasn't just another storm. This was nature's fury in its most terrifying form, and what happened to the people of Jamaica in those 48 hours will haunt this nation for generations to come. Before we dive into this story, if you could take just 1 second to hit that subscribe button, it would mean the world to us. We're pushing to reach 10,000 subscribers, and your support helps us bring you more critical stories like this one. Now, let's continue. On October 27, 2025, meteorologists watched in horror as Hurricane Melissa rapidly intensified from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane in less than 18 hours. The National Hurricane Center issued emergency warnings, but nothing could have prepared Jamaica for what was about to hit. By the time Melissa made landfall near Black River in St. Elizabeth Parish on the morning of October 28th, it had become one of the most powerful hurricanes to strike Jamaica in recorded history. The barometric pressure dropped to a catastrophic 940 millibars. To put that in perspective, that's lower than Hurricane Gilbert in 1988, the storm that Jamaicans still speak about in hushed tones decades later. But numbers on a chart don't tell you what it's like to be there. They don't tell you about the sound of your roof being ripped off your house like paper. They don't describe the terror of watching water rise inside your home so fast that you barely have time to grab your children and run. They don't capture the moment when you realize that everything you've worked for your entire life is gone in a matter of minutes. Sarah Thompson, a nurse at Black River Hospital, was working the night shift when Melissa arrived. She later described the experience as something out of a nightmare. The hospital, a 3-story concrete structure that had stood for over 60 years, began to shake violently as the hurricane's eyewall passed directly overhead. Windows exploded inward, sending glass flying through corridors where patients lay helpless in their beds. The emergency generator failed within the first hour. In complete darkness, with wind and rain pouring through shattered windows, Sarah and her colleagues had to evacuate 47 patients, including 12 in critical condition, to the hospital's interior stairwell. They huddled there for 6 hours while the building groaned and cracked around them. 3 patients didn't survive the night, not from their original conditions, but from exposure, shock, and the inability to provide proper medical care in those horrific conditions. The devastation to Jamaica's infrastructure was beyond comprehension. In St. Elizabeth Parish alone, over 18,000 homes were damaged or completely destroyed. That's 18,000 families who lost their shelter in a single night. The Jamaica Public Service Company reported that 92% of the island lost electrical power, but it wasn't just a temporary blackout. The hurricane had destroyed over 400 transmission towers, snapped power lines across thousands of kilometers, and damaged 7 major substations. Energy Minister Darrell Vaz announced that full restoration could take up to 8 months in some areas. 8 months without electricity. Think about that for a moment. No refrigeration for food, no way to charge phones to communicate with loved ones, no lights after dark, no fans or air conditioning in the tropical heat. For millions of Jamaicans, the 21st century disappeared overnight. The agricultural sector, the lifeblood of Jamaica's rural economy, was absolutely decimated. Hurricane Melissa struck during the peak of the harvest season, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Agriculture Minister Floyd Green estimated that the hurricane destroyed approximately 75% of crops in western Jamaica. Sugar cane fields that had been ready for harvest were flattened into muddy pulp. Banana plantations, which take over a year to mature, were stripped bare, with trees snapped like matchsticks. Coffee farms in the hills, some of which had been operated by the same families for over a century, saw their entire year's crop wiped out in hours. The Jamaica Agricultural Society calculated losses at over $230 million US. But again, numbers don't tell the human story. Those losses represent thousands of farmers who have no income, no way to feed their families, and no certainty about their future. In the coastal town of Treasure Beach, a popular tourist destination known for its laid-back charm and beautiful shores, the storm surge was catastrophic. Witnesses reported waves reaching heights of over 6 meters crashing into beachfront properties. The surge didn't just damage buildings near the water. It pushed inland for over 300 meters, flooding homes, shops, and hotels that residents thought were safely out of reach. Marcus Bennett, a fisherman who had lived in Treasure Beach his entire 53 years, watched from higher ground as his house was consumed by the sea. Everything was inside. His fishing boat, his equipment, family photos, his children's school certificates, a lifetime of memories. When the water finally receded, there was nothing left but the concrete foundation and scattered debris. Marcus told reporters that he felt like he had lost not just his home, but his entire identity. The human toll extended far beyond property damage. As of the latest reports, Hurricane Melissa claimed at least 43 lives in Jamaica, with dozens more still missing. Each one of those numbers was a person with a name, a family, dreams, and a future that was stolen by this storm. 27-year-old teacher Kimberly Williams died when a tree crashed through her home in Manville while she was trying to protect her 2 young children. Both children survived with serious injuries. 72-year-old Joseph Campbell, a beloved community elder in Black River, suffered a fatal heart attack during the evacuation when the stress became too much for his body to handle. 16-year-old athlete Devon Grant, who had dreams of representing Jamaica in track and field, was swept away by floodwaters while trying to help neighbors evacuate. His body was found 2 days later, 3 kilometers from where he disappeared. Jamaica's schools and educational infrastructure suffered devastating damage. The Ministry of Education reported that over 270 schools across the island sustained significant damage, with at least 43 rendered completely unusable. These weren't just buildings. They were community centers, safe spaces for children, and symbols of hope for a better future. At Monroe College in St. Elizabeth, one of Jamaica's most prestigious secondary schools with a history dating back to 1856, entire sections of the historic campus were destroyed. Dormitories where students slept, classrooms where generations had learned, the library with its irreplaceable collection of Caribbean literature, all heavily damaged. For thousands of students, the hurricane didn't just disrupt their education for a few days. It threw their entire academic year into chaos, with many schools unable to reopen for months. The healthcare system, already strained before the hurricane, was pushed to the breaking point. Beyond Black River Hospital, at least 17 medical facilities across Jamaica reported severe damage. Cornwall Regional Hospital in Montego Bay, the primary medical center for Western Jamaica, experienced major roof damage and flooding that contaminated critical areas including operating theaters and intensive care units. Patients had to be transferred to facilities in Kingston, over 200 kilometers away, a journey that in normal times takes 3 hours, but during the hurricane's aftermath could take 8 hours or more on damaged roads. For people suffering from chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension, the disruption to regular medical care became life-threatening. Dialysis patients who need treatment 3 times per week found themselves with nowhere to go. Cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy had their treatments interrupted, potentially jeopardizing their survival. Transportation infrastructure across the island was shredded. The National Works Agency documented damage to over 650 kilometers of roadway. Major highways were blocked by landslides, fallen trees, and debris. Bridges that had stood for decades were washed away or structurally compromised. The main coastal road connecting western Jamaica to Kingston was cut in at least 8 locations, effectively isolating communities for days. Small rural villages found themselves completely cut off, accessible only by helicopter. When emergency responders finally reached some of these communities, they discovered people who had been without food, clean water, or medical assistance for over 72 hours. The desperation was palpable. Water infrastructure was equally devastated. The National Water Commission reported that over 60% of Jamaica's water supply systems were damaged or non-functional. Treatment plants were flooded and contaminated. Pipelines burst or were blocked by debris. Storage tanks were destroyed. For over 1.2 million Jamaicans, access to clean drinking water simply vanished. People resorted to collecting rainwater, but after the hurricane, even that was often contaminated with sewage, chemicals, and debris. The risk of waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid became a terrifying reality. Health officials scrambled to distribute water purification tablets and bottled water, but the need far exceeded the supply. The economic impact on Jamaica's crucial tourism industry was immediate and severe. Tourism Minister Edmund Bartlett announced that initial assessments showed at least 90 hotels and resorts sustained damage, representing over 8,000 rooms out of commission. But the impact went deeper than building damage. Jamaica's tourism brand is built on images of pristine beaches, lush tropical landscapes, and vibrant communities. Hurricane Melissa shattered that image. Beaches were littered with debris, forests were stripped bare, and communities were in ruins. International tourists who had booked vacations canceled in massive numbers. Airlines reduced flights. Cruise ships rerouted to other Caribbean islands. The Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association estimated losses of over $1.4 billion over the next year. That money represents jobs for hotel workers, restaurant staff, tour guides, taxi drivers, and thousands of other Jamaicans whose livelihoods depend on tourism. In Negril, famous for its 7-mile beach and stunning sunsets, the hurricane transformed paradise into a disaster zone. Rick's Cafe, the iconic cliff diving bar that had been a must-visit destination for tourists since 1974, was severely damaged by the storm's surge and wind. Sections of the cliff face collapsed into the sea. The restaurant structure, which had been renovated just 2 years earlier at a cost of millions of dollars, was torn apart. For the staff who worked there, many of whom had been with Rick's Cafe for decades, it was heartbreaking. These weren't just jobs. For many, Rick's Cafe was family. The psychological trauma inflicted by Hurricane Melissa cannot be measured in dollars or statistics. Mental health professionals working in Jamaica after the storm reported unprecedented levels of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, especially among children. Kids who experienced the terror of the hurricane, who saw their homes destroyed, who were separated from parents during evacuations, who witnessed death and destruction, will carry those scars for years. Organizations like the Jamaica Red Cross mobilized counselors to provide support, but the need was overwhelming. In shelter after shelter, social workers encountered people who were physically safe but emotionally shattered, unable to process the magnitude of what they had lost. Communication infrastructure collapsed across much of the island. Cell towers were toppled, fiber optic cables were severed, and internet service disappeared for millions. In our hyperconnected world, being suddenly cut off is more than inconvenient. It's isolating and frightening. Families couldn't reach each other to confirm who was safe. Business couldn't operate. Emergency services struggled to coordinate responses. International news coverage of the disaster was delayed because journalists on the ground had no way to transmit their reports. The telecommunications company Digital reported that over 40% of its cell sites were damaged or without power. Restoring full service would take weeks at minimum. Emergency shelters filled to capacity and beyond. The Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management opened over 200 emergency shelters across Jamaica, housing more than 57,000 people at the peak. But these weren't comfortable temporary accommodations. They were school gymnasiums, church halls, and community centers where hundreds of people were crammed together with minimal privacy, inadequate sanitation, and dwindling supplies. Families slept on floors with only thin mats or blankets. Food was rationed. Tensions ran high as days stretched into weeks with no clear timeline for when people could return home, if they even had homes to return to. Shelter managers and volunteers worked around the clock, but they were overwhelmed by the scale of need. International aid began flowing into Jamaica within days of the hurricane, but coordinating and distributing that aid proved incredibly challenging. The United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Caribbean neighbors like Trinidad and Tobago sent emergency supplies, medical teams, and financial assistance. The United Nations activated emergency protocols. Non-governmental organizations mobilized resources. But getting aid from the airport or seaport to the people who needed it most required navigating destroyed roads, coordinating with overwhelmed local authorities, and making impossible decisions about priority. Every community needed help immediately. Every family needed food, water, and shelter. There simply wasn't enough to go around, at least not fast enough. Prime Minister Andrew Holness, in an emotional address to the nation 3 days after the hurricane, declared a state of emergency and appealed for international assistance. With visible distress in his voice, he described Hurricane Melissa as the worst natural disaster to strike Jamaica since Hurricane Gilbert 37 years earlier. He acknowledged that the road to recovery would be long, difficult, and expensive, with preliminary estimates suggesting total damages exceeding $3 billion, equivalent to roughly 20% of Jamaica's entire annual GDP. That's a staggering burden for any nation, but especially for a developing country already facing economic challenges. The Jamaican diaspora, millions strong across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, mobilized immediately to help their homeland. Fundraising campaigns launched within hours of the hurricane. Communities organized collection drives for supplies. Money transfer services saw massive spikes as people sent funds to family members back home. Social media became a lifeline, with people posting information about missing relatives, coordinating aid deliveries, and sharing stories of survival and loss. The response demonstrated the deep connection that Jamaicans worldwide maintain with their island, but it also highlighted the scale of need that no amount of private charity could fully address. Environmental damage from Hurricane Melissa extended beyond immediate destruction. Jamaica's coral reefs, already stressed by climate change and pollution, suffered extensive damage from the storm surge and sediment runoff. Marine biologists fear that some reef systems may take decades to recover, if they recover at all. Mangrove forests, which serve as natural barriers against storm surge and nurseries for fish populations, were stripped and uprooted. Forested hillsides experienced massive landslides that not only caused immediate destruction, but also set the stage for future flooding and erosion during regular rainy seasons. The Blue Mountains, home to Jamaica's famous coffee and rich biodiversity, saw extensive damage to forest ecosystems that had been protected for generations. As rescue operations transitioned to recovery efforts, the true scale of the challenge became clear. Rebuilding wouldn't be a matter of months, it would take years. Entire communities needed to be reconstructed. Infrastructure required not just repairs, but upgrades to withstand future storms. Economic systems had to be revitalized. And throughout it all, millions of Jamaicans had to find the strength to keep going, to maintain hope, to believe that their island could heal. But here's what Hurricane Melissa couldn't destroy: the spirit of the Jamaican people. In the darkest hours after the storm, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had lost everything still helped neighbors. Communities organized themselves to clear roads and search for survivors. Young people formed volunteer groups to deliver supplies to elderly residents. Musicians held impromptu concerts in shelters to lift spirits. Restaurants that still had generators cooked and distributed free meals. Churches became coordination centers for aid distribution. The resilience wasn't just inspiring, it was essential to survival. Stories of courage emerged from the chaos. In Savannah, Lamar, a town severely impacted by flooding, 23-year-old Michael Thompson rescued 11 people, including 4 children and an elderly woman, using nothing but a rope and his own strength as a former lifeguard. He waded through chest-deep floodwater mixed with debris and sewage for over 3 hours, making trip after trip, refusing to stop until everyone in his neighborhood was safe. When asked why he risked his life, he simply said, "We're Jamaicans. That's what we do." The recovery process revealed both the best and worst of human nature. While most people pulled together, there were reports of looting and price gouging in the storm's aftermath. Some store owners tripled prices on essential items like water, food, and batteries, exploiting desperate people. Police had to be deployed to protect aid distribution centers. But these darker moments were vastly outnumbered by acts of extraordinary kindness and solidarity. Hurricane Melissa also exposed long-standing vulnerabilities in Jamaica's development. Many of the homes that suffered the worst damage were in informal settlements where building codes weren't enforced and construction materials were inadequate. The storm didn't discriminate between rich and poor, but the poor suffered disproportionately and would struggle most to recover. This reality sparked difficult conversations about inequality, development priorities, and climate justice that continued long after the winds died down. As Jamaica begins the long process of rebuilding, the question isn't just about restoring what was lost. It's about building back stronger, smarter, and more resilient. Climate scientists warn that storms like Melissa are becoming more frequent and more intense due to warming ocean temperatures. Jamaica, like all Caribbean nations, sits on the front lines of climate change despite contributing minimally to global emissions. The injustice is stark. Those least responsible for climate change suffer its worst consequences. Hurricane Melissa devastated Jamaica, but it didn't break Jamaica. In the months ahead, the world will watch as this proud island nation, with a history of overcoming adversity that stretches back centuries, once again demonstrates the power of human resilience. The road is long. The challenges are immense. The losses are profound. But if there's one thing that history teaches us about Jamaica and its people, it's this. They don't stay down. They rise. They rebuild. They endure. And they emerge stronger on the other side. The story of Hurricane Melissa and Jamaica is still being written. Recovery continues. Families are still searching for missing loved ones. Communities are still clearing debris. But through it all, the spirit that defines Jamaica, that blend of strength, creativity, warmth, and absolute determination, burns as bright as ever. Hurricane Melissa was nature's fury at its most destructive. The response is humanity at its most resilient.